What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Denver Out. We're talking this or that, our favorite series here on the channel, talking about who you're going to draft in your rookie drafts. We're having a fun one today. Xavier Worthy versus Brian Thomas Jr. Who would you rather have on your dynasty rosters? So we're going to be taking a look at all kinds of different things. We're going to look at ADP. Give us your takes a little bit. We're going to be talking about, hey, what do we like? What is the most important for your dynasty rosters? And just arguing a little bit. We had this last year. Me and Christian always have a wide receiver battle. Last year, I got my butt kicked, so we're not talking about who I was picking last year, but this year's a little closer. So when you're looking at ADP, Xavier Worthy, 109, wide receiver 4. Brian Thomas Jr., 110, wide receiver 5. They are going flip, though. They're going back and forth, and it's kind of interesting to see depending on, what people believe in, what offenses they believe in. I love the Worthy talk because everybody pre-draft was like, oh, he goes to Chiefs. He's going to be 109. They were right. He's moved up. He had that good landing spot, and he's kind of there now. Now, before we get into kind of what we project for them as the NFL players, got to go back and look at their college production, just kind of look at what they were able to put on the field. Worthy came out and had one of the best true freshman seasons for a wide receiver in a long time, even analytically speaking. 62 catches, 981 yards, and does 12 touchdowns. He really stood out there. Yards per reception was high. ADOT was high. And in the last 2 years, been a little up and down. His sophomore year, a little banged up, 760 yards, 9 touchdowns. Last year, still had the 1,000 yards, but was hurt and maybe poor quarterback play, depending on what Quinn Ewers truther you talk to. Quarterback in Texas, some people like him, some don't. But Xavier Worthy's profile is really good. There's a reason why he got drafted where he got drafted. There's a reason why the Chiefs wanted him. And that's what we've seen from a college side. But like Christian's going to talk to you about Brian Thomas, he had a hell of a year last year as well.
Yeah, so Brian Thomas Jr. was a slow starter in college, not quite the early producer that Xavier Worthy was with the sub 400-yard seasons in his first two, but steadily increased his output. 31 catches in his sophomore year compared to 28 as a freshman, 5 touchdowns. And then Brian Kelly got on him and said, hey, man, you're too talented to be putting up this stat line to be a non-factor in our offense. Came out 68 receptions, 1,177 yards, 17 touchdowns, was a really great deep threat for Jaden Daniels in that offense. He complemented Malik Neighbors super well. But this was a scary, scary tandem. When you have 2 first-round receivers on one team, it tends to be you can't really focus your attention on anyone. That also happened in Texas as far as first-round talents, at least, as most people would say. But yeah, this to me, Brian Thomas had a massive, massive step forward. Definitely a better season than Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, he did. I mean, the big number, 17 touchdowns, that stands out. I mean, he went up there and got it, and he definitely has that. He showed that he has that athleticism. He's got that basketball background, so you saw that his ability to play the ball in the air, those type of things. It does help. Having Malik on your side, though, matters a little bit more than having like Adonai Mitchell over there with Xavier Worthy. I mean, having that level of talent, but they certainly pushed the ball vertically. Both these guys did, and they're in their college offense as well. When you're giving Xavier Worthy, so when I'm looking over Xavier Worthy's profile, kind of diving into his going to the Chiefs. Now, everybody just it is positive, when you look at it from a scouting perspective. What does he do well? Well, first thing, we know he's fast. Like, that's number one, 4.21 in the 40. We see that. Now, the question is, like, how creative can he be after the catch? Pretty damn creative. When you saw him play at Texas, a lot of things for Sark, the head coach of Texas, what he was trying to do was scheme him open, scheme him on those screens, scheme him. The bubble screens was really good, the slants and the goes. Now, I think he can do more than that. I think he's more nuanced than that. I do think he can work inside and out. So I think he gives the Chiefs an interesting kind of, outlook for what they can do with him out there. I think Marquise Brown is there as their X, and I understand they have Rashee Rice possibly going to be suspended there. But Xavier comes in where he can really be maybe that one option. I think that he has the trust of that staff as he goes. I know there's a video out there, so before everybody in the comments starts yelling at me about his first drop out there, I know, I saw it. And I think that's one thing with Xavier Worthy when we were going over the scouting for him. Did have drops. They were an issue, right? Like, it really his sophomore year. He had more of drops that year. He did also play with a broken hand. So there's also that. But I can't just sit here and make excuses for him. He's got to clear that up. But if you remember right, Jamar Chase used to have drops too in the preseason because the balls were different, right? Like, there are those things. We can't take one drop pass and say, oh my gosh, he's going to be a bust. More of the whole profile of the whole player. So from a scouting perspective, he fits this team well. Natural deep threat. I don't think his frame pushes him to one spot. I actually think that he can play both inside and out. But you have to love where he went. And if anybody's tied to Patrick Mahomes, they're automatically going to get that bump. I know that we've seen this with Sky Moore. Not to bring up Sky Moore to Christian. He was a big Sky Moore guy. But like we've seen it with him. Different level of talent, though. Sky Moore was a G5 receiver. Xavier Worthy went to the college football playoff last year for Texas. Was able to do that. I think Kelsey signed a 2-year deal. I think that Travis Kelce is an absolute phenomenal player that they're going to try to limit as much as they possibly can to get to the playoffs. So I don't see them having that same usage there. Marquise Brown is a 1-year, he's a rental. Rashee Rice is great. I love Rashee in that offense, but Xavier Worthy tied to Mahomes is a hell of an outlook for him. Depth chart's wide open for him. He has no one in front of him there. And I'm big on him. I think that he comes in, Brown can kind of tutor him as well. Mahomes being there. And what do they want? Speed to push across his defense against cover 2. He's going to be able to do that. And I think that's a big part of Xavier Worthy's game.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, Xavier Worthy, to me, a lot of people thought he was just a deep threat, and then they didn't really watch the last couple of years with Quinn Ewers, who struggled with his deep ball. So they got Xavier Worthy involved in the screen game. I think they went too far in that direction. I think Xavier Worthy could have had a massive, massive year if they kind of just let him cook. I mean, we saw in the Alabama game specifically, Xavier Worthy beat the Alabama corners deep. And Quinn Ewers was able to drop one in for him, like 60 yards downfield, 50 yards downfield, whatever it was. He has that in his game. I know a lot of people think that there's some Deshaun Jackson to Xavier Worthy's game. I see that as well. But to me, he's a complete receiver. He's a complete player that we've always been high on. Maybe I'm just a little higher on the next guy.
All right. Talk to me about Brian Thomas Jr.
Yeah, Brian Thomas Jr., like you said, 110, wide receiver 5. It has been flipped in quite a few of my leagues. I've been hoping to get Brian Thomas Jr. I've settled for Xavier Worthy. But from a scouting perspective, Brian Thomas Jr., like you mentioned, the basketball background, he can go up and win in contested catch situations in a big way. He's got the speed to push vertically. I think he's got underrated ability to separate on underneath routes and things, especially comeback routes. Comeback routes are some of his better ones. His in-breaking stuff isn't quite there yet. He's definitely more developmental as a route runner. Xavier Worthy has the whip route that I just can't get over. Just one of the smoothest whip routes. You won't see Brian Thomas Jr. out there running that, but what he can be is that big X wide receiver with strong hands, consistent hands. That's something that's been missing from this Jaguars offense for a while now. If you look over the course of Trevor Lawrence's career, he has experienced the most drops out of any quarterback in the NFL during that time because they've employed Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk has not been a model of good hands either. Evan Ingram has always had dropping issues. So to me, Brian Thomas Jr. comes in. He can be a reliable target for Trevor Lawrence. I mentioned Zay Jones. They did just recently move on from him. So now we're kind of looking at a situation where it's Gabe Davis, Brian Thomas Jr., and Christian Kirk as your primary wide receivers. I think in those scenarios, Brian Thomas Jr. probably gets the nod as the starter in 2 wide receiver sets. I don't know how many 2 wide receiver sets they're going to run moving forward. To me, this looks like a team that's ready for 11 personnel. They can get creative with Evan Ingram out in the slot. But I think Brian Thomas Jr. is going to get on the field immediately. I think that he is going to develop that chemistry. We saw, I did the training camp reports last year for the Jaguars, and there was a very distinct chemistry between Calvin Ridley and Trevor Lawrence in the preseason, and then it didn't really carry over into the season. I think this will be a little bit different because it's a young wide receiver, and Brian Thomas Jr. to me has all of the traits that Trevor Lawrence has always loved in his wide receiver 1. We talk about Justin Ross back in the day, T. Higgins back in the day at Clemson. I think this is the type of wide receiver that Trevor Lawrence can succeed with because he's not afraid to throw it into tight windows either. So to me, Brian Thomas Jr. can have a top 24 season immediately. I think we could look at him as a guy who's scoring. He scored 17 touchdowns last year. I think he could get into the double digits this year if this Jaguars offense takes a step forward. And I'm pretty optimistic about his immediate outlook in 2024.
Yeah, no, I think he landed in a really good spot because, like you said, I was going to bring that up. Like, people forget, before all, like, the Justin Ross is a god last year, like, all that stuff that was going on in nonsense, he was really good as a freshman. Like, Justin Ross, they won the national championship because of them. I think to Brian Thomas, this is the first time they've got a wide receiver, even Calvin Ridley. They went out and got a wide receiver that fit Trevor Lawrence's play style. And I think that's super important for how talented Trevor Lawrence is, to get them that guy, because Trevor Lawrence, for all the good, and Christian will talk to you about the bad, because we've talked about this with Trevor Lawrence. He was kind of right about that in terms of what he does. He does tend to YOLO ball it a little bit, and he'll definitely he does things that you question, like where's that questionable decision making? Where are you going with that football? When you YOLO balling it to Christian Kirk or even Calvin Ridley last year, that stuff doesn't usually play well. But Brian Thomas gives him that YOLO guy. Brian Thomas gives him that guy that can go up and get it, use that athletic background, elite size, speed, kind of use that for him. He's the first guy I really felt like they built around kind of Trevor Lawrence for his play style there. And I go back and forth. I think he's fun at his ADP or where he's at. I do think he's a little more boom or bust when you're looking at this. This is a fascinating. So we're going to get into it. We're going to pick right now who we'd rather have, and we'll kind of argue about this. We'll keep the receipts. But before I do that, this kind of reminds me, we did this last year for Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnston a little bit. And they're similar-ish. Like I do think that Thomas, they're actually pretty similar when you're looking at profiles and what they did there. And then we saw that disastrous Quentin Johnston where he's tied with Herbert. We're pretty excited about that. And then Addison has done well, but now he's got a rookie quarterback and all that. But I do think it's similar arguments for both of these guys, because this is kind of where they were going to in rookie drafts last year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you talk about that, I think there was a readiness in Jordan Addison, the same way there's a readiness in Xavier Worthy, where there's a rawness in Brian Thomas Jr. and there was a rawness in Quentin Johnston that it didn't really improve throughout his rookie year. I think, I'll have Quentin Johnston takes on this channel at some point, but I still think that as a developmental receiver, he can be successful. I do think Brian Thomas Jr. to me is a little bit more ready in that I think the catch point stuff is so much better. And like we talked about with Trevor Lawrence being willing to throw that and maybe too willing to throw those balls, I think that that's what will help Brian Thomas Jr. is the above the rim stuff is a little more advanced than the Quentin Johnston, but that's right. I think that this is a similar discussion here.
Yeah, I'm taking Xavier Worthy though, because you know what, I love pain, and I like the risk of going with him. And to me, it comes down to simply, and I know this is like people will say it's a bad argument, some will. Patrick Mahomes is throwing Xavier Worthy the football. I love him in this offense with Andy Reid, the way they can scheme, just like Sark, where I think there are question marks about Trevor Lawrence and even that offense. I think that there are question marks about what Peterson has done there. What is that going to look like? And I think Worthy's safer. I think it's weird to say that because he is the kind of risky as well. I think both these guys are risky. But I like Worthy because he's paired in that offense, and I think they're willing to make it work, and they went up and traded with Buffalo to get in that pick and in that spot to get Xavier. I realize they've taken some shots on other wide receivers, Tony and Sky Moore and those type of things. But I've been really high on Xavier Worthy since he came out into college. So I'm going to lean Xavier Worthy.
Yeah, I'll take Brian Thomas Jr. for the fact that I've had Brian Thomas Jr. ahead of Worthy for a long time, but you can check the receipts over on the old X app. But I've also been a big fan of Xavier Worthy. These are two really great receivers. These are two wideouts. I mean, we weren't going to be talking about Brian Thomas Jr. if we're having this discussion a year ago, right?
No.
This was one of those massive risers. That does make you a little hesitant, but with the landing spot combination, the fact that there's so much rawness, but still so much potential, I think with Brian Thomas Jr., we could be talking about a top 5 wide receiver in the NFL potentially. We could also be talking about him as souped up Gabe Davis, like I've said recently. So to me, this is a coin flip. Like I said, I've come out of a few rookie drafts with Xavier Worthy now. I do have a little bit of Brian Thomas Jr., but I'm not upset if I have either of these guys. But if presented with the choice, I'll take Brian Thomas Jr.
All right, we'll see. We're going to see how it plays out. We're going to be looking at that. Before we get out of here, I want to give a shout out to our Patreon. Be sure to go check that out. We have 3 tiers, the Riley tier, Day tier, and the Saban tier. We have the Dynasty content. We have our Devy combined rankings. If you play college football there, we will have Dynasty rankings as well. We also we have a Substack. We have all kinds of different content for you. It's only $5 a month. If you just want to go to the Discord, which has been popping, people have been going crazy there. It's only $1 a month. You get a discount if you sign up for the full year. Go check that out at patreon.com/theDevyRoyale. You can find it below in the description and you can click it there. Appreciate you guys. Let us know in the comments. What do you think? Who you drafting? Xavier Worthy or Brian Thomas Jr.?